Good evening. I'm Bob Shrum, the Director of the Center for the Political Future at USC Dornsife. For those of you who don't know me, welcome to the folks who are here and to the folks who will see this discussion on Zoom or hear it on our podcast, The Bully Pulpit. I first want to introduce my partner in crime and my co-director of the center, Mike Murphy. We're on opposite sides of the political spectrum for years, but we've also been friends for years. And that represents something of what the Center for the Political Future is all about. We're going to have a kind of informal conversation and talk with our spring 2023 CPS Fellows for the next 40 to 45 minutes. And then we'll open this up to some questions if folks here have any. First, let me acknowledge two of our spring fellows who couldn't be here today. Michael Bishop was a Republican member of Congress and is the founder and president of American General Counsel, PLC. His study group will focus on the 21st century transformation of politics. Can we still bridge divides? Martha Escudier is a retired state senator and currently serves as vice president for state government relations and special counsel at USC. Her study group is entitled A Latina in Politics, Power Moves, and I don't mean salsa dancing. You will see more of Mike and Martha as the semester moves along. Now let me introduce the fellows who are here with us today. And I'm not going to necessarily, I'm going to try and do this in the order that they're seated. Hank Plante is an Emmy and Peabody award-winning American television reporter for CBS, a news anchor, and a newspaper columnist. His study group will explore the politics of journalism and the journalism of politics. Bill Carrick is a strategic and media consultant for ballot initiatives and candidates in California and nationally, including Ted Kennedy, Dianne Feinstein, and Bill Clinton. His study group is about something he knows a lot, all about campaigns. Stephanie Young is the executive director, is that right?
That's right.
Of When We Vote.
When We All Vote.
Yeah, founded by Michelle Obama. And, my notes. There she is, When We All Vote.
Yeah.
And her study group is on the intersection of pop culture and politics. And we'll delve into how popular culture influences our elections and shapes our democracy. We are thrilled that Stephanie is joining us as our Barbara Boxer Fellow this fall to lead her study group. And by the way, Hank Plante is our David Bohnett Fellow this fall. Ira Reiner was the district attorney of Los Angeles. Before that, he was the city attorney, and he was for the city of Los Angeles, and the controller of the city of Los Angeles. His study group is entitled Who Will Guard the Guards? And it's on prosecutorial and police misconduct. And everybody will talk a little bit more about their study groups as we go along. Finally, John McConnell, someone I admire very much and disagree with almost all the time. He was senior speechwriter in the White House for George W. Bush and for Vice President Dick Cheney. Wrote some of the incredibly memorable words that came after 9/11. And his study group is going to be on how to write speeches for a politician. And I think it takes a lot of courage to decide that you can actually teach that. So I think we'll start off, I'm going to start off with the first question and then yield the mic. And this is for everybody. We just go around the horn. You all come at this from different perspectives, but here at the center, we look to bridge partisan divides and to at least, we might disagree with each other, but at least to respect each other and respect the truth. With the recent contentious vote for the Speaker of the House, what do you think Kevin McCarthy can do to work with Democrats? Does he want to work with Democrats? And how can he even handle members of his own party to help enact must-pass legislation like raising the debt limit? Or is that, and any hope for bipartisan progress, kind of a hopeless cause? Hank?
I don't know if he can work with his own party, to be honest with you, because it seems like Nancy Pelosi's biggest attribute was her ability to bring the left in to her tent Just like Jerry Brown, when he was governor this last time, Jerry Brown's biggest accomplishment was herding these Democrats in together, because it's like herding cats. So I don't know if McCarthy can do it or not. I mean, he barely won this thing.
Bill?
I thought that the spectacle we witnessed of his election, all 15 ballots, was unique in American political history for sure. But it was also like, they had a hostage and they were gonna keep going until he surrendered. And it just was unbelievable, because the Speaker of the House of Representatives now has basically gotten elected by these, whatever it is, what was it, 14 or 15 of them? How many were?
Well, there were 20 holdouts initially.
20
and then it got
holdouts
reduced.
initially, hardcore 14, deep hardcore 6. But it was, and what made it so revealing was the last few ballots, everybody started to explicitly deal for committees and everything else. And I've never seen a spectacle like that in public. There's obviously been things that go on behind the scenes that we don't know exactly how they work, but this was just stick them up in public. So I think this thing he gave up, which allows any member of the House to bring a motion to the floor to vacate the chair, in other words, get rid of the speaker, that is eventually going to get them. It's going to happen sooner or later, and it's probably going to happen pretty fast.
Yeah, well, I worked on Capitol Hill for many years. One, working for Steny Hoyer as the Democratic whip, where you actually had to count the votes. And then also working as a communications director for the Congressional Black Caucus. And to your point, Hank, about how Pelosi was able to bring everybody in, obviously that was on full display consistently. So whether or not he wants to work with Democrats, if he's interested in getting anything done, he's going to have to work with Democrats, because he can't control the crazies, and he can't control all of the dysfunction that we saw on full display, which was quite frankly not embarrassing just for Republicans, it was embarrassing for the United States. And he obviously has weakened his position. And all I can think about is when Cantor lost his seat, and it happened all of a sudden. Obviously, he wasn't taking care of home in Virginia, but it can happen. And I think that he's weakened himself, and he's weakened the Congress, and he's put us in a bad position to get anything done for the American people.
Anybody gonna give me a guess as to whether or not we're gonna actually pass something that will raise the debt limit?
Yes.
Go ahead, Ira, and then.
Well, I'm encouraged by what Mike on my left, well, that's a switch. But what Mike had to say. As to your question, Bob, this sounds like a punchline and a joke, but what we saw over those several days through 15 ballots, that gave politics a bad name. Again, that sounds like a punchline and a joke, but truly it did. As to your real question here as to whether McCarthy can bridge a gap of this polarization, well, it's a pointless point to even discuss. Of course he can, and it has nothing to do with McCarthy. It has to do with that crowd that held out for so long and finally allowed him to become speaker so long as he gave them everything that they wanted, which really, of course they wanted committee assignments. But what they really wanted and what they're really going to get is the ability to control everything that goes on the Republican side in the House. And that, if that's the case, then it's pointless to talk about any sort of bridging of any sort of ameliorating in any way the polarization. It's going to be, it's going to be so much worse than it ever has been, and certainly has been very, very bad. So that's what we're in, what's in store. Will the debt ceiling issue be ultimately resolved in a way that the country doesn't crash? Yes, I think it will be. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but I cannot see, no matter how much they play the game of chicken, that they're going to allow the country to crash. They can point a gun at their head and say, do this or I'll kill myself. But at a certain point, they're not going to pull the trigger.
You know, it is interesting that none of you have mentioned that there are some more moderate Republicans, one of whom today, Congresswoman from Indiana, said she is not going to vote to throw Democrats off committees, that, and there may be one or two others. And at that point, then he can't throw Democrats off committees except for intelligence because it's a select committee, which he has the power over. But I'd like to hear from John.
They'll raise the debt limit because they have to. It will happen. But it's interesting to me, just from a historical point of view, we're just now leaving an era of a Speaker of the House who had real power and authority. And I heard Newt Gingrich say on TV a few weeks ago, Nancy Pelosi is arguably the most effective Speaker of the House we've ever had. And now you have a speaker, a Republican speaker, whose main focus is keeping that title. And the last Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, didn't even want to be
Right.
Speaker of the House. And so it's just strange, if you look at the sweep of history, Speaker of the House used to be a very big deal. They would spend their whole careers building up to that. Tip O'Neill became Speaker, what was he, 65? When he became Speaker of the
Yeah,
House?
he'd been there. He
Yeah.
succeeded, he got elected to Congress in '52, succeeding a young congressman named John F. Kennedy.
Right. Yeah.
And
And then he serves his time, and then he becomes Speaker at 65 years, holds on to that for 10 years. It's what he aspired to, lives out his career, the rest of his career. And then you had Paul Ryan, he didn't want the job, left the House after 20 plus years, and he wasn't 50 years old when he left.
Boehner was only too happy to
Yeah,
be forced out.
yeah, after 3-4 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just interesting to see how the office still has obvious powers and influence, but it's nothing like it used to be.
Mike, you want to weigh in on this? And then
Yeah,
we'll-
this one is so good, I can't resist. You know, there are multiple failures happening simultaneously. It's coming to a head. One, you had one wing of, because Congress is not designed for a 3, 4, 5 seat margin, because it makes everybody an independent operator. It's not like the Senate, where individual members in both parties have a lot of power. In Congress, the majority has all the power, the minority has very little. But when you get down to, a couple, then a couple have a lot of power. So they held up McCarthy. McCarthy gave away the institution to get the seat. People don't talk about it a lot, but the all-important Rules Committee, which controls the floor, it's really how the leadership runs Congress, now has a bunch of single-issue people who are going to vote as a block saying, metric system's a communist plot, we need a floor vote. And the Democrats are perfectly capable of, let's have a floor vote, put them all on record, and passing stuff through a Rules Committee, which will lose control of the floor. So all kinds of institutional problems. Then the other institutional problem is we no longer operate under regular order, where the Committee on Fisheries decides what to do about the flounder, and it goes to appropriations, budget rule, and to the floor. Now it's all done in the middle of the night with a 1,000-page bill nobody reads, because it's totally dysfunctional there. Now, just to finish up on the question, they have to do the debt ceiling, so they will, but it's gonna be the perils of Pauline. You know, the old movie with the lady on the railroad tracks and the thing coming. We could have a UK-like situation here. Liz Truss, shortest prime minister in British history, came out with kind of a half-baked plan that wasn't presented well, and the markets panicked. And that blew up the Tories, and now they're running 20 points behind Labour, and they may lose power. The only footnote in this is Joe Biden has no interest in negotiating a deal. So it's not like a bunch of Democrats waiting to negotiate. 2 reasons, one legitimate, one in my view not. The legitimate reason is they don't want to reward the debt ceiling as a negotiation tool. If Congress worked like it used to, there would be other places to do that. The other thing is Biden's not that interested in cutting spending. It's not the equation of their party. Now, that used to be an easier attack to make as a Republican, but Trump was almost as bad as Biden. Republicans have become big spenders. But what gets the caucus going, and I think appropriately, the Freedom Caucus is using inappropriate tactics to prosecute a very legitimate argument. We're up to 133% of GDP in debt. We have a huge debt crisis in our country. And our political class, particularly in the House, which is totally divided, is showing no interest in doing anything about it. So there's a lot of sympathy on the Republican side to get into some kind of spending cuts, there's zero sympathy on the Democratic side. So there's actually a legit argument underneath all this. The problem is the debt ceiling is not the way to do it. That's like fly swatting with nitroglycerin. Yes, the fly is a problem, the nitroglycerin is very dangerous. But I think in the end they will, but this will be the craziest last minute. And the Democrats, as they already have, I mean, Janet Yellen was so shameless with the, well, we better start getting ready to eat a lot of canned food here. We're getting the bunker ready at Treasury. So both sides are gonna play the stupid brinksmanship, and this time it could do economic damage. But in the end, I think they will.
Yeah, I think they will too, and I also am not at all clear, and we've never faced this question, the debt ceiling has only existed since World War I. We never had rises in the debt ceiling. The Constitution says you have to give full faith and credit to the United States, to its financial obligations. So it's not even clear to me that a limit on the debt is constitutional, although I don't know what the courts would do if we got into a crisis. By that time, you'd have a stock market crash on the scale of 1929.
It's happened once for about a day in the 70s, but that was a technical one. The markets were prepared for it. This is a functional breakdown.
Bill?
Just to put a blatantly partisan political note on this. The reason the Republicans aren't going to do the debt limit is because McCarthy's totally driven by fundraising. All of corporate America will land on his head if he plays chicken with this for more than 30 minutes. I mean, everybody you see on CNBC on any given day, and the rest, and all the other people that are on CNBC will be raising hell about this. And you know, it will be Morgan Stanley, everybody will be having a fit about it. And a lot of these people are Republicans and Republican donors. And they are the people that are putting money into all these super PACs with unrestricted money. So they will shut down the whole show. The rest of it will be a joke after that, because the Republican Party will be functionally dead.
Well, they're doing a deal where Democrat votes will make it happen. And then if the caucus, the wings nuts in the caucus are mad enough, they will vote to vacate Kevin. And he might have to, as part of that deal, have 5 Democrat votes ready to back him up as speaker. I mean, they're gonna have to make a complicated insurance policy to get that final 12, 18 Democrats. But anyway, it's banana republic stuff, and it's not in the national interest.
Okay, I thought we might turn to a series of individual questions.
Sure.
To each of you, but anybody's welcome to comment on whatever any of you said. Mike, you wanna go first?
The staff has appropriately scripted me like a hostage video here.
No, I did. Actually, I did.
That's why, for Stephanie.
Like
the
McConnell, you
Democratic
know,
Party,
we're
the
used to writing
greatest
stuff for other people.
All right. Here is the question for Stephanie, where you get the first fastball, anybody can join in.
Okay.
Here at the center, we are committed to bridging the partisan divide and encouraging respectful dialogue. It seems as though what I like this, Mike Murphy has described as a quote, "I'm right, you're evil" mentality dominates today's political culture. As the executive director of a nonpartisan organization, what are your thoughts on getting along with people with whom you fundamentally, and I would say properly, politics is not about everybody agreeing on applesauce. It's how you do your disagreement. So what are your thoughts on getting along with people with whom you fundamentally disagree? How can we keep conversations with them productive and respectful?
Yeah, well, one thing I did when I worked on Capitol Hill was that I did a bunch of congressional delegation tours overseas, and they usually tap staffers at work for leadership so that they are able to create more relationship with different nations that we are building relationships with. And we always, every time I went on a trip, it was with a lot of Republicans. I remember those being some of the best times. I had the best times. I made some really great friends. And that's because we were just being humans together. You know, we're breaking bread together. We're watching something together. We're learning something together, and we're learning something broader than, you know, what are your political views or your ideas. And I think that obviously that's something that we have missed and we're missing now, is being able to have that barrier broken down. I do think that we're living in a really weird time because sometimes folks' attachment to their party or to their ideology is harmful to someone's existence and to be who they want to be in this world, and also for democracy. So I think that as long as you are building conversation and relationship based on fact and truth, there's a far way that you can go. And I think one thing that when we all vote that we really strive to do, since we are a nonpartisan organization, is voting, civic engagement, democracy. It's bigger than one party, it's bigger than one person, it's bigger than one group. And if we continue to create, I think, strings of connection based on, oh, I love Barack Obama, or I love Donald Trump, or I love this person, you're not loving the fact that we are living in a democracy and it takes all of us to be a part of it consistently, right? So we have to start thinking about government and democracy, not based on a figure that we like or that we are inspired by, but based on the idea that we're all supposed to be a part of it. So we consistently work hard to try to separate an individual, a feeling away from this work, but get people drawn to the ideals of it. So that's not a clean answer, it's hard. I think the last thing I'll say is like listening. We don't listen to people anymore. And there's a way to disagree and not to be, I won't say disagreeable, but to politely disagree. And democracy is a test. It's a hard experiment to do, to take people from all of these different perspectives, experiences, walks of life, and say, let's all work together. We're not supposed to agree, right? And that's fine. So how do we have better discourse with each other, recognizing and understanding that we might never meet on this wavelength. However, there are different points of connection. So how do we build from there? And I think especially for a lot of the folks who are supposed to be representing us, they got to put us first and think about our well-being instead of their political, careers or the things that they want specifically for them or just their communities. It's a larger picture, and I think this kind of even stems from, what we've just talked about and all the dysfunction that we're seeing. The American people aren't part of that. Nobody's thinking about what's next and what's coming next for us. They're thinking about themselves, and so I think it's critically important that we take a step back. We'll be open to listen to each other and to build connection and to understand that disagreement is a part of democracy.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you say, but I maybe look at it from a different angle and perspective. First of all, there was never a once upon a time in politics. But there was a qualitative difference between the fairly recent past and today. This is maybe not a political problem as much as it is a sociological problem. And politics is following sociology, or the politicians are following the people, or rather than the reverse. And Trump was a man for his time, that there was this smoldering discontent. And Trump had the feral instincts and abilities that others in public life didn't quite have. And he was able to seize upon that. And what we have now are differences that are frankly existential. They're not really like the differences we had in the recent past between limited government and expansive government. We're talking about democracy.
Yeah.
And without any hyperbole or exaggeration, with Liz Cheney, a speechwriter for her father. She stands, not to overstate it, maybe I am, but sort of as a bulwark is not a strong enough word. I'm starting to repeat myself. This is an existential moment, and we need other people with the voice of Liz Cheney more than there needs to be, I think, at this point, given these circumstances, a discussion of how we all get along. Maybe Liz Cheney is the Joan of Arc that is going to save us from the fall of democracy, which is frankly the reason Trump is not president today, having lost the election, is because his plan was mostly ad hoc. And he didn't have the people in place to carry out what they were trying to do. They've had some time to plan. Maybe it will fizzle out again. And then again, maybe what he started has metastasized nationally. And in the absence of Trump, there are people that were infected by Trump and with the metastasizing throughout the country. Maybe the threat is going to be far greater in '24 than it was that we so narrowly escaped in '20.
I have to state the obvious, which is that a lot of the division is being fueled by the media and how polarizing the media is. When we have Fox News driving the conversation on the right, and when you have MSNBC driving it on the left, CNN is trying to find a different path under Chris Lick, the guy who's running it. And I don't see where
That's
that's,
called desperate necessity.
yeah.
That's a programming problem.
Yeah, but there's big money at stake in Fox News and in MSNBC. And I don't pretend to know where it's going, but I know they're driving it, and I think you do too.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to be mamby-pamby, right? Like, it's hard to build connection in this moment when so many things are at stake. And especially if we're looking at the health and the longevity of our democracy. And, I don't know how, I'm not a genie, I don't know how you build a relationship with someone who doesn't believe in facts, who doesn't, believe in just the basic foundation of democracy, where we're seeing a lot of people are starting to say, well, this country is actually Republican, we're not Republic, we're not a true democracy, which, obviously there's some challenges there, but like, if we have two different fundamental foundations as to where we're coming from, and we also have the media that consistently fuels, not just, having us at each other's throats or having us up in arms consistently is big money, and it is the driving force for our media right now, our news. So instead of us getting actual real facts information, they are teetering on the hope that there's a scandal brewing with documents and with this and equalizing things that don't need to be equalized. So it's put us in obviously an extreme polarizing state. And it's made it harder for us to communicate with each other. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop. And my hope is that we have more Liz Cheneys and we have more people standing up, not for party, not for self, but for democracy, so that we're actually able to build bridges forward.
John, I want to get you in on this, but I want to ask you a specific question too. Comment on this, but then put us in the Oval Office and give us a sense of what it's like to collaborate on speeches with the President of the United States.
Well, I have limited experience to one president, so I can
That's
describe.
a president.
That's enough.
Well, in the case of the president I work for, and of course you worked on major addresses for President Clinton, I think those two presidents were similar in certain ways, that they really cared about their speeches. By the time President Bush got up to give a speech, it really represented what he wanted to say, because he had spent so much time on it. People would ask me, how much ad-libbing did he do? Clinton did a lot. George W. didn't do any, because he spent so much time on that speech. It's what he wanted to say. He was a very serious editor, very intense, confident editor of speeches. He would give us, and for a major speech, State of the Union, address to the nation, he would give us, of course, plenty of upfront guidance on what he wanted to say and how he wanted to organize. But then he would sort of let us go off and do it, staff it around to the vice president, who would read it and not really comment on speeches, the chief of staff and the department heads. And then a practice session in that family theater in the East Wing that I guess the Eisenhowers put in. And so the teleprompter's set up there. If you worked on the speech, you're in the room. And then he would stand up and read it. And I think it was just exactly the same with President Clinton.
Clinton would edit while in the theater
And Bush did the same
on the teleprompter.
for hours, right?
Yeah.
And President Bush would do that too. I remember one time the president's dog had had enough of this. Barney, and he started biting the president's pant leg. And my colleague Matthew Scully said, look, that's the only creature on earth that could attack the president of the United States.
Mike, you wanna?
Yeah, just how many drafts would an average significant Bush speech go through? From conception, which is always 40 people and 40 agencies trying to
Right.
weigh in, to the actual delivered draft.
State of the Union would be draft 32. But the difference between 31 and 32 is going to be a small fact-checking question. And the difference between 20 and 32 is, they're not going to be huge, but the difference between 6 and 8, it will be pretty dramatic. He would come in a day or two before the actual event. I remember one time in particular, he came in and the staff secretary was there, the chief of staff, Dr. Rice, 3 speechwriters, and we'd been working on it. This was the 3rd or 4th practice. And President Bush came in and said, morning, everybody. This is not an editing session, meaning no more changes, and he wanted to bond with it at that point. He would be very patient if people had suggestions, but he had limits to his patience. And he would also, when people would lobby the speechwriters, really put this in, it's really important, it's so important, it's just a line, it's just 9 words, right? And President Bush he would spot these, and he called them cram-ins. And he would get to that point in the speech and he'd read it and he'd go, oh, got a cram in. He said, I want to guess who gave it this, who insisted on this. And he could always guess. And then I'd say 99% of the time he'd say, take it out. And that'd be it. But we had accommodated the requester.
Very, very quick, and then I'll go into a new question. Of all the politicians you work for, who was the most focused on excellent speeches, other than George W.? Really took him seriously, understood the power.
Well, Dan Quayle, my first boss,
I remember.
is the only person I've ever written for who would write an entire speech on his own. He's the only one who's ever done that. And he had a newspaper background. And so he was used to writing fast. And when he left office, he actually had a weekly newspaper column for a couple of years, which he would do himself and pound out. So he would come in on a Monday, and back in the era of floppy disks. And he'd call me and he said, John, I wrote a speech this weekend. And give it to me, and it would be a whole speech, beginning, middle, end, good lines, everything else. And then I'd be reading, you were around in those days, I'd be reading and it's okay, and this is nice. And then it would say, John, find me thus and so, and it would be, or John, put in the part from the Chicago speech that I liked, or he would just write those things too. So he was very focused, and Quayle would look at a speech and say, this is good, but it needs to be cut by a third.
Yeah, almost always a good idea. So Hank, we're gonna go from politics to journalism. What do you regard as the most important story you ever covered in your long career?
AIDS.
So talk about that,
So I think I was the first openly gay TV reporter in America. And there I was in San Francisco. And AIDS came along. And so it was more than a story to me. The national media wasn't covering it, really. And President Reagan wasn't talking about it. Bill and I were just talking about this before the session started. I stood in front of Reagan the night that he said the word AIDS for the first time, 1987. Elizabeth Taylor dragged into a speech. And I made a note that night in my reporter's notebook that at that moment, when he said the word AIDS for the first time, 23,000 Americans had already died. And so being open and working in a market like San Francisco, which was ground zero for the AIDS epidemic in this country, it was a gift, as weird as that is to say, because it was a chance for me to use my skills to go on the air every night and tell people, how do you not get this disease? Or what drugs are working, what's not working. It was more than a story to me. My friends were dying. And so I really look back on that as a gift.
So I want to give everybody some sense of our fellows. And that's what this session is really about. So Ira, I'm going to turn to you and ask you about LA specifically. We have a new mayor. And do you think Karen Bass can actually make real progress against homelessness? Do you see any sign of it happening? And she also has to face the problem of what to do about the police chief and what to do about the police. I mean, she's got a lot on her plate. Where's this gonna go?
Every mayor has a lot on their plate. Let's see, you asked two questions, I think.
Yeah,
One,
homelessness and police, which seem to be the two dominant issues.
Yeah. Can she really make real headway with the homeless problem? Probably not. I mean, realistically, probably not. That is not a criticism of Mayor Karen Bass, whom I supported and whom I like a great deal. It's just a recognition of reality that I don't know that that problem can be dealt with effectively. Maybe it's an intractable problem, and maybe I'm absolutely wrong, and she will be the first person to have dealt with a problem that wasn't worse after that person dealt with it. Over time, we look back, the homeless problem is much worse today than it was a year ago. And a year ago, that same thing could have been said, and a year before that, and so on. I'll repeat one thing I said way back in the 1980s. I was either city attorney or district attorney at the time, and it was a smart-ass remark that I made, but I was trying to make a point. And I said there were two reasons why the homeless problem couldn't be solved. And the first reason was that conservatives thought that every homeless person was a bum, and liberals thought that every bum was a homeless person. Well, okay, like I said, that was a smart-ass remark.
Good smart-ass remark. Yeah, it's a very good one.
Yet, I think it touched on a real point, that everybody is coming to this with the one true religion perspective on the problem, and whatever their true religion happens to be. And they talk past each other, and they all have their ideological views as to what to do about the problem. And that has led to the problem getting worse and worser. And I wish Karen Bass, well, frankly, I wish LA and I wish myself that she is successful. But say it's a long shot doesn't begin to describe it.
Bill, I want to ask you about how different campaigns are.
Police though, is that, you know, it's about.
Oh, the police. There's two intractable problems.
No, that's not an intractable problem. That's a big one. But I don't know, if you drop by on Mondays at noon, from noon to 2, talk about it at night. Well, let's see, where to start on here, because I'm gonna keep this real short, like for 30 seconds. Well, I talk about police and prosecutorial misconduct, focusing more on police misconduct. It's the George Floyd problem, if you want to put it that way, of the gross abuse of police authority and use of force, sometimes fatal, very often not fatal, but much more numerous. That's one problem. But I don't think that is the greatest problem we're facing writ large. I think the greatest problem in terms of police enforcement has to do with the underlying, you call it a mindset of policing that is generally accepted as appropriate. So not talking about the obvious violation of law, gross abuse of force and authority, but the type of law enforcement that is generally accepted. We have on every black and white car, protect and serve. And then you have the Police Protective League, which is the union for the rank and file of LAPD, that has the phrase, the thin blue line. Well, put those two together. That thin blue line posits that there are two societies. On one society is violence and chaos. On the other side of that divide, that thin blue line, is civil society. And the purpose of law enforcement is to contain and suppress violent crime on that side of the divide in order to protect and serve on the other side of the divide. And that is the basic, if you want to call it a philosophy, a practice of law enforcement. And it's the law enforcement that the public generally, writ large, wants to protect the civil society side of that divide by preventing violent crime from seeping from the chaos, violent side into civil society. And it's impossible. And of course, it does seep through. And when it does, there is the immediate cry of a rise in crime. When there is no rise in crime, it's just some of it has seeped across. A year ago or so ago, we had an increase in, or not an increase, a sudden change of smash and grab crimes, where groups would come storming into a department store, break everything in sight, grab merchandise, and go out and sell it on eBay or someplace. Suddenly, people shopping at Nordstrom's were faced with crime that had seeped over from the other side of that divide. And now there was the cry, it shouldn't take an act of courage to shop at Nordstrom's. Well, yeah. So now we had the cry of that there was an increase in crime when there wasn't. So in terms of dealing with the question, that underlying question about policing, it's not the greatest problem of the officers that abuse their authority, but it's law enforcement that views suppression and containment on the other side of that thin blue line as appropriate law enforcement. What happens, it builds hostility. Hostility grows till there is an explosion because there's an incident, and there's always an incident. Critical mass forms from all that hostility, and it builds and builds. With enough critical mass, there's a spark of an incident, and then there's an explosion, and then there are protests, and then there is damage, and there are fires, and then there are arrests, and it calms down, and then it starts to build again. And it's, wash and repeat.
It'll be interesting to see whether gas can break that cycle.
Yeah.
So I think we have a question we're gonna end with for everybody, but I think you wanna ask
Right.
Bill?
I think, Bill,
Yeah.
we're gonna go to tawdry politics now, Bill, so since I can't answer this one, I'm gonna throw it to you. And, any way you wanna go at it, but what I've got here is how does campaign strategy change for local, state, and federal campaigns? Can you tell us a little bit about how your study group will kind of teach students about the world of political campaigns?
But I think, all of the things we've talked about are related to the way we elect people nowadays, which is no longer the parties go find the best candidate they think and run that candidate, and they get elected or don't get elected. And the other party does the same thing. Now everybody's an independent actor for the most part. And And it's all, some of this is because of the way we communicate with society now. There's no longer, when showing my age, we had three television networks. Everybody watched those same three television networks. It was all appointment TV. You watched Ed Sullivan at 9 o'clock on Sunday night. All of that stuff is long gone. And what we have is people watching all kinds of programming all over the map, streamers, connected TV, cable, regular broadcast. You go on and on and on. And so there was the old media structure, there was some capacity for unifying dynamic. Walter Cronkite, everybody trusted Walter Cronkite. Huntley and Brinkley, they trusted Huntley and Brinkley. Now we don't have any of that.
And
It's
half the
like-
people in here don't even know who those
They
people
don't know,
are.
I'm more than half, I'm sure. But what we do now have is Fox has a political mission. MSNBC has the political mission. CNN has programming problems. When people they choose the media that they think reinforces their own beliefs. They don't explore issues from both sides. There's nothing like that. It's all like, just find out where you can get reinforcement and do that. And it's all made more complicated because even though there's a lot of money out there in politics, it's harder to communicate because there's so much fragmentation in the way we communicate anything in this society. And it's so people don't really get a unifying message. The idea with all of us up in this front here have been through this business of politics, finding the message. What's your story? What do you, and having that perfect stump speech that, Ronald Reagan gave the same stump speech from the time he left GE until,
His last day as president.
yeah, same speech. It was always the same speech. And I heard it personally 10 times in person. But there's none of that anymore. It's all and what matters is, now we had a president who decided, well, this new system was great because it was going to screw the establishment and maybe an insurgent could come up. And he played it very well. And Twitter and all those things that he did in the campaigns worked very well for him. But they're one paragraph comments. They're not like a program. They're not a philosophy. They're not what you're going to do as president that day, or you're going to do as a presidential candidate forecasting what you're going to do. There's none of that. It's just like hit the right pressure point, get people to A, give you money, B, go out and vote for you. And it's we have a very fragmented political system, and that where does that lead us into all this turmoil we had? We started obviously January 6th, but we still have a hell of a lot of turmoil. We just finished electing a guy to the United States House of Representatives who has more problems than the rest of the members of Congress all combined. I mean, it's unbelievable. And somehow between the news media
Don't you give him
and
credit
two
for
major-
inventing the polio vaccine?
Yeah, but the national media, the local, one newspaper in Long Island has dealt with this, one small little newspaper. And most of the 99% of the media didn't deal with this. Neither political party deals with it. We talk about opposition researchers that go out and dig up all the dirt on the candidate.
Yeah.
Where the hell were they? They took
Nobody
that
was
campaign
represented.
off? What the hell, where the hell were they? And incredibly enough, it was in the interest of both parties to take him out.
Yeah. No, they had it. It's just, some of the arse always gonna lose, who cares?
Mhm.
And now, prop them up because you're desperate for the vote, even though the guy's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just like.
I mean, I personally think if lying disqualified you for Congress, we'd never have a quorum. So this guy's a serial killer of this fabrication.
Literally,
Yeah.
But with the fragmentation is what is the biggest thing that is changed how we conduct our campaigns, and the way we conduct our campaigns creates more fragmentation.
You know, I'll just chime in quickly. I'm on the board of another one of these things at Chicago, University of Chicago. And we find the most fascinating thing about the sociology of politics now is the delta between how people act on social media and how they act in their personal lives. We take a bunch of kids from urban Chicago, who I will bet you dollars to donuts are base Democratic voters. And we take a bunch of kids from a Trump county in rural Illinois and we lock them up for 3 days together. And by the end of it, they're all best friends, they're writing songs, 2 of them are married. I mean, it is amazing because the social instinct of humans to kind of band together is very powerful. But when you're a little detached, you can tweet your rage and everything, and the algorithms, of course, smash you together with other people who think that way, and it becomes an escalating feedback loop. It's very toxic, and we are paying a price for it right now.
So we wanted to give people a sense of our fellows, and I think that we've done that pretty well. And I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Unfortunately, the people who are watching on Zoom can't ask, but people over here can. So if you have a question, ask.
So in the last 3 election cycles, youth voter turnout has been much higher. Do you see that trend continuing into 2024? And what do campaigns on both sides, Republican and Democrat, need to do to ensure that that youth voter turnout will remain high?
Well, I'll take this. I'll say that, I mean, youth voter turnout was high in 2020 as well. So there's an uptick that's happening. It actually was higher in 2018 for a midterm that we don't talk much about, but it went up a tick in 2018. Then in 2020, we had 50% of young people voting. And then obviously in 22 is about 27%, even though that's the highest youth voter turnout. On par, I think maybe it was about 18 years ago, there was another kind of splurge in that moment. But, you know, through research, we do know that young people are understanding their agency. They're understanding that their power, they're understanding that when you band together, you actually can be a political movement. And unlike any other generation in recent history, through the pandemic, experiencing and really seeing how government played a role in their life, from police violence to climate change. These are all the issues that are pushing now. Now you have also the reproductive justice issue that is very important for young people. So they are recognizing and seeing their power. I do believe that we'll continue to see an uptick and trend going in the right direction. I do think that campaigns, and typically presidential campaigns, do a good job with hiring a lot of young people, right? But it's making sure that they understand all the fragments and the way in which this generation communicates. Only 8% consume traditional news. So if the majority of them are on TikTok or on social, they're on YouTube, it's not about how do we get our messages on there, how do we create the best messengers like you to be a part of what we're doing to help be out in the community virtually or literally in person, because we know at the end of the day that candidate, that celebrity, that athlete is not the best influencer. That young person is the best influencer for the people that are around them, including the adults, the parents, their lives, the grandparents, and their own peers. So I think that there's a lot of folks who are aware of this, and you also have really big movements, not just counting When We All Vote, but Next Gen and others who are dedicated to helping young people find their political power. And now that we have a Gen Zer in Congress, I can imagine that continuing to happen, considering, slowly but surely, representation is getting more diverse, it's getting younger, and I think you can now see and recognize your impact when you do vote and participate. And I do think campaigns are recognizing that.
To make a crass point, if I can.
Yeah.
What the GOP can do in 2024 to ensure very high youth voter turnout is to nominate Donald Trump again. That would produce very high young turnout among young people.
It's kind of ironic, because Joe Biden, who's 118, will rely heavily on young voters to survive or not.
But Ronald Reagan, who was in his day the oldest American president, had huge support among young people. A whole generation of young people became Republicans. I think what's happening now is a whole generation of young people are gonna become Democrats.
Yeah, and they're not also identifying with parties.
Right, but they're gonna
They're
become
identifying with
progressive.
issues.
Yeah.
So if you're about my issue, I'm with you.
I think the other thing that we're finding with this, the youth surge of youth young voters, is they're finding ways to communicate with each other outside the boundaries of traditional communications. So there's a lot of young voters who talk to each other about this stuff. When I was doing Sheriff Luna's election, I was stunned at how many very young people had decided they cared very deeply about who was gonna be the sheriff of LA County. And they started talking to each other. Their first instinct is to talk to each other. And it was pretty profound, and we ended up slaughtering them by a big, they didn't come by a big margin, but it did extremely well with young voters.
In the mayor's race, Caruso won voters over 46. But the young vote was so overwhelmingly vast, that was the key to her victory on age, also Democrat.
And we say they're not really party identifiers or Democrats, but they vote Democrat.
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah.
And that, so, I mean, that's maybe a distinction with a difference, I don't know, but but they do vote. Young voters are not finding anything they like about the Republican Party. And I think some of this is also economic. There's a whole bunch of young voters with economic anxiety about the future and what it's going to mean to them. And they have an interest in national politics that is different than it was, even 10 years ago.
Let's take two more quick questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Building off Eleanor's question, at the top of the session, you all to various degrees lamented McCarthy for his concessions to the Freedom Caucus, and I'm no fan of the Freedom Caucus, but could the argument not be it's better to have a speaker which is more sensitive to other issues or other concerns within the party? I'm thinking not so much about the Freedom Caucus, but I'm thinking back to Nancy Pelosi, which you all praise as a very good speaker because she was able to toe the party line, even though there's significant progressive voices in the Democratic Party now. I think a lot of young people, and they tend to be more progressive, were frustrated that they could not make any progress in Congress because of Nancy Pelosi being so powerful as speaker.
Well, what she was, I'll just give you my view. Nancy Pelosi, very practical, pragmatic person. She is actually very progressive. And what she was interested in doing was passing legislation that could actually be put into law, not just passing legislation that would make a point, send a message. She wanted to actually change things. And I think, I never thought I'd utter this sentence, I agree with Newt Gingrich that she probably is the most effective speaker, at least in memory and maybe in history. We wouldn't have Obamacare without her. And I'll just tell you a brief story. I mean, after the Ted Kennedy Senate seat was lost in Massachusetts, Democrats no longer had the 60 votes in the Senate to pass health care with the filibuster proof. And had a meeting at the White House, and Rahm Emanuel, then the president's chief of staff, was there, and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and the president. And the president said, well, go ahead, make your case. And to Rahm. And he said, well, I think we ought to skin this back, and maybe we ought to just think about covering women and children, and then we could return to this issue in a few years. And Nancy Pelosi said, what makes you think I would vote for that? I call that the Titanic strategy, women and children first. We're not doing it. And President Obama said, well, that takes care of that. And she then did something that, if you understand Congress, is almost impossible. She persuaded the House of Representatives to pass the bill the Senate had already passed without an amendment. Because if it got amended, it had to go back to the Senate and there weren't the votes for it. She persuaded them to do that, and that's how Obamacare got enacted into law. That's why people say she's so effective. And by the way, most, not all, but most of the people who call themselves progressives or are in the progressive caucus, like Ruben Gallego, would say that Nancy Pelosi was someone they felt very comfortable with because she got things done. Joe Biden has just done more stuff legislatively. You might not like it, but he's done more stuff legislatively than in a shorter period of time than any president since Lyndon Johnson.
Pelosi was old school in that, and she came up in Baltimore politics, in that she'd use fear. When you walked into Pelosi's office, there were two things you saw: a bowl of famous San Francisco Ghirardelli chocolates and a baseball bat. Meaning to go, I'm not a super fan. That Taiwan trip is the stupidest thing a speaker has done in foreign policy for a generation.
That's about to happen again.
I know, it's terrible, it's very risky, and we're gonna find out. But she was a power politician who would use fear. A lot of the successful speakers had a real psychopath as a whip too. That was the old Republican mob. Remember Tom DeLay, the hammer? He didn't get that nickname because they thought it was cute. Kevin McCarthy never uses fear. He's a pleaser. And so they declawed him. And now the inmates are running the asylum in the House caucus.
We're gonna have to wrap up. Anybody have a question that somebody could answer quickly? Yes.
I'm gonna ask something building upon that.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, cutting back revenue. Why is there a discussion about raising taxes? Is there any appetite for that in terms of like the debt limit? Is there like a deal that can be reached?
Well, again, you got this procedural problem of we can't use the debt limit to negotiate because that starts a precedent. If we had regular order, yeah, there's a discussion about it. Do you raise some revenue and do you cut some spending? Generally, the parties are dug in. The Democrats don't want to cut much revenue. And if they do, nobody agrees on the revenue. And the Republicans sort of want to cut revenue, but never want to touch taxes. So they're kind of in the logjam on it. But we don't even operate Congress like we used to, where you had this phrase regular order, where the committees decide the priorities and it's negotiated at multiple levels. Now they put an emergency thing together in the middle of the night that's 1,000 pages long and they slam it through on a party vote. It's a very dysfunctional way to operate. And even if you have goodwill towards some negotiation. And there's a lot of stuff about this on the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a kind of the government wing of the Congress. It's very hard to get done. And also, politics orders everything. I mean, so if the Democrats are like, yeah, this debt limit thing is terrible, they're scaring the country, hopefully they'll burn their fingers off and we'll win the 6 seats. Because remember, at this close, somebody in the Congress is gonna have a heart attack and die. And somebody else is gonna get a $2 million a year job at the Railroad Institute. And so there's almost never a congressional vote where they're all there. This thing is not designed to operate this way. So we're in for all kinds of drama in the House, which means it's even gonna be more dysfunctional than usual.
Okay, this was a terrific session. I think people really got a sense of, I got a frog in my throat. Everybody else got a sense, I think, of what our fellows are like and what they can offer. And I make you one promise, we will never hold another event in this room. So, thank you all and good night.